Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to HTML Lesson 5. We're going to be talking about attributes and styles today. So I hope you've been having fun adding links and images to your web page. Now let's get some greater control over the default settings of our tags. So as I always do when I start these videos is I'm going to start with a question. Today that question is, what is an attribute? Now in HTML, an attribute is just anything inside of the opening tag that is going to be adding extra information to that HTML element. So a couple things to note about attributes is that all HTML elements can have attributes and that they are always placed within the opening tag of our HTML element. And we've actually been dealing with attributes without even recognizing it. Just to let you know, an example would be the hyperreference of our link tag or HTML element. We're going to be this whole hyperreference right here is the hyperreference attribute of our link. So I didn't mention that previously, but now you know that that is actually considered an attribute, right? Because the tag is A, which stands for anchor, then the attribute is this link right here that is the hyperreference. That's all the attribute of that link tag. Another example would be in our images. So we have the image tag, then we have the source attribute, which is going to be our image URL, the width attribute, and the height attribute. Those are three different attributes within one tag. So as you can tell, we can have multiple attributes inside of our opening tag, and that is not uncommon. The last one I want to mention briefly is just the HTML. You can set the language actually, so this language attribute, you can set the language of your entire HTML page. Obviously there are some default languages that we can use, but there's quite a few languages that are going to be compatible with your web browser. Now, in these examples, I did not actually mention probably the most useful attribute there is, and that is known as the style attribute. So this style attribute is actually going to allow us greater control over each of our HTML elements. So the basic syntax of a style attribute is it's very similar to what you just saw, except for you're going to say if this tag could be a heading or paragraph, then you would say style. So this is a style attribute equals, and then we're going to have a property, which could be something like text, font type, text color, text align, any of those kinds of things, and then a value, and the values would be like the color, the font size, or those types of things. So a couple other examples would be example properties are font family, color, font size, text align, and background color. So those are examples of properties. Following the property, you're going to put a colon, then a value for that property. So with font family, we have the Arial, text, font, the Comic Sans. If you did color, you could do blue, green, red, or this hashtag 00FFF. That is actually the hexadecimal value for aqua. So you can look up hexadecimal values and put those in as your property value. Font size is in percentages, and then obviously alignments for text is going to be center, right, left. You can't, there's actually not a number value for those, but it goes property, then value followed by that. So let's actually take a look at an example. So the first thing, let's pull this up. So I have my background changed colors, I have this heading is Arial, and I have this paragraph to be white, this paragraph is small, and I want this centered. So let's look at the code and see how that worked, okay? So this first bit, I actually redefined the body style background color to be purple, as you can see here. So now the background is purple, as you can see. The next thing I did is I said the heading, I want the font family to be Arial. Then after that, I went ahead and put what I wanted my heading to be, and I said I want my heading to be Arial, and close that out. So as you can see, we have our opening tag where the style attribute is placed, followed by the normal heading that I would have put there, and then the closing tag. So all this is doing, the style attribute it's just an additional part of our opening tag. Note that we have a little bit of different syntax, though. We have an extra attribute here, but all it is doing is applying to this single line, this single tag right here that is from here to the closing tag. The next one is we have the paragraph style. I had this paragraph white. I said style equals color, colon, white, semicolon, all of that in quotes. And I wanted that paragraph to be white, so I typed that in, and then I closed that out. The next one is I wanted that font size to be smaller, so I went ahead and did that. And notice for all of these, though, again, I have my opening tag and my closing tag. Remember, anything in between those opening and closing tags is going to be where that style attribute is applied. So if you wanted the font family Arial to be applied to all of them, you would have to use that attribute. So the last one that I want to talk about is this text-align center, and then it just says center, and this should be centered. So if you want to do multiple styles in the same tag, what you would do is you would continue on and take this portion. So let me highlight this really quick. You would take this portion and actually go ahead and put it after that semicolon. So you would take color, colon, white, after the semicolon, put it here, so it would be font family, Arial, semicolon, color, colon, white, semicolon. Now, this heading would not only be the font family Arial, it would also be the color white. So that's actually pretty useful, and I thought I'd point that out really quickly. So, now, this is actually an example of CSS. This is the most limited form of CSS, and there are a couple different CSS methodologies. So there's inline CSS, which is what we just did. This is adding styles to your HTML tags. However, it is only applying to the HTML where that tag is being applied. So inside of that one tag, we're going to be having that inline CSS. Obviously, that's pretty limited because we're going to have to define our CSS for each tag, and that takes up a lot of time, and it's very limited. The next best way, I guess, a better way is internal CSS. And this is added to the head section of our HTML file. So here we're going to actually style all of our paragraph tags or all of our heading tags. And we're going to be specifying those stylings inside of the head of our HTML file. So it's inside of that same HTML file where we're going to be coding, but at the top in our head we're going to actually put in what we want those paragraphs and those headings and whatever we want to style inside of that head section. So it's in that same file though. Then finally we have external CSS. Now, external CSS is the most versatile of all of these methodologies because you can actually create your own classes that will apply to specific scenarios, and it allows a lot more versatility. And we'll go over external CSS in a future video. But with external CSS, it's actually a separate file than your HTML file that you create. So you would be referencing a separate CSS file and calling that in your HTML file and use it, which is really nice when you want to use that same CSS file in multiple web pages. So this allows you to keep themes and layouts similar throughout all of your web pages without having to do it every single time. So obviously that's pretty awesome. Now again, we'll learn a little bit more about internal CSS than external CSS as we go on, and soon enough you will be able to make your own CSS files. So, in summary, we talked about attributes that add information to our HTML element, so things like our hyperreference or image source, width, height, and various other examples. We learned how the style attribute actually controls aspects of our HTML elements. We also learned that style attribute is an example of inline CSS, and we learned about each of the different CSS methodologies, those being inline CSS, internal CSS, and external CSS. So, we will learn a little bit more about that in the future, about each of those different methodologies, but for now, go ahead and have fun changing the font colors, sizes, families. Just go crazy. Have some fun. Alright, I'll talk to you later.